You believed with every fiber of your being that you were doing the right thing. You watched someone drowning in their own chaos, entangled in self-inflicted pain, and a wave of compassion rose within you, a tide so strong it demanded action. So you reached out. You offered a lifeline, poured your time, your energy, your patience into them, certain that your steadiness could guide them to safer ground. But there is a peril woven into this impulse, one most never see until the trap has sprung. Some souls are not ready to be found. They are unwilling to face the echoes of their choices and incapable of holding the weight that comes with true growth. When you try to rescue such a person, your good intentions become kindling for their chaos, an accelerant to the very fire you hope to quench. What you called generosity can transform in their hands into an instrument of harm, a force that fortifies their defiance, that lets them tread more heavily upon the hearts around them. The compassion you offered so freely is not a gift in this economy, it becomes a weapon. The irony cuts deep. You acted from care, from a faith in the alchemy of empathy. Yet the world teaches a sterner lesson. Empathy without the guardrails of discernment has a breaking point. You learn that some will accept your support not with gratitude, but with a cold entitlement. They will use it to assert dominance, to answer doubt with rebellion, to transmute your earnest energy into proof of their own invincibility. The very deed meant to nurture growth becomes a fertilizer for arrogance, resentment, and ruin. You start to sense the invisible snare. A hand extended in rescue can become a chain, binding both the giver and the receiver, leaving you depleted, exposed, and strangely complicit in the storm. This is the hazard of misplaced compassion. It is seductive because it robes itself in moral virtue. It appears the pinnacle of care. But a chasm lies between empathy and enabling, between mercy and indulgence. Our world holds many who will consume guidance without yielding growth. The energy you pour into them, the sacrifices you make, becomes invisible or is warped into leverage. Every attempt to lift them, every kindness, becomes a tool they wield to prove they are untouchable, that consequences are for others, that they float above the realm of responsibility. In your fervor to save, you may unknowingly hand them the means to dismantle those who ever question them, yourself included. Within this quiet tragedy rests a necessary, harsh lesson. Compassion alone is an incomplete instrument. To genuinely aid someone requires more than noble intent. It demands judgment, boundaries, and the clarity to see who can truly be helped and who cannot. Without this discernment, the act of rescue becomes a catalyst for deeper chaos. The hand you extend is not always a bridge. Sometimes it is the very rope that pulls you into a maelstrom you never meant to enter. You learn that moral courage is not only the willingness to help, but also the fortitude to withhold help when it would only enable destruction. The mirage of blind empathy, we are taught that compassion is the ultimate virtue, the mark of a soul risen above pettiness. But within it hides a subtle vulnerability rarely spoken of. Compassion without discernment is not strength, it is fragility disguised as grace. When you give yourself to someone who clings to their chaos as an identity, your empathy ceases to be a force for good. It becomes an open door, an invitation to exploit your patience, your time, your moral resolve. The instinct to heal is noble, but when applied indiscriminately, it carries a hidden tax that often comes due too late. Those most resistant to change often attract the most benevolent attention, a tragic irony. The trust you place in their potential, the energy you invest, is frequently twisted into a tool for resistance. This is the trap of blind empathy. It feels morally imperative to intervene, to protect. Yet that intervention can rot the very foundations that allow growth, the necessary raw confrontation with consequence. To shortcut that process for the unwilling is to sabotage the machinery of responsibility itself. What feels like mercy becomes interference. What feels like love becomes enablement. Every sacrificed moment becomes potential currency for manipulation, a resource for those skilled at mining the compassion of others. It is not always inherent malice. It is profound unreadiness. They lack the inner architecture to receive help, to integrate guidance, to answer care with accountability. In that lack, they become dangerous, not in overt evil, but in their ability to invert your good intentions into power. The cruelest part is the delay. You may not see the harm until patterns have hardened. Resentment solidifies, defiance emerges, chaos spirals. The very person you sought to save begins to erode the stability of your world and the worlds around you. It starts with small disregards, forgotten thanks, subtle manipulations, exploited patience. Then it escalates, consuming faith and hope until the seed of salvation sprouts into a vine of destruction. You then face a painful truth: empathy misapplied is not virtue. It is a liability, a weakness that can be weaponized by those unwilling to meet the demands of their own lives. Boundaries are the counterweight to compassion. Without them, kindness is unmoored, morality adrift, and the potential for harm swells. To recognize the limits of who can be helped is not cruelty, it is wisdom. To understand that some must weather their own consequences uninterrupted is to acknowledge that growth is earned, never gifted. Responsibility cannot be imported, it must be claimed from within. When empathy operates without judgment, it erodes the very structures that make moral and psychological development possible. The most treacherous illusions are those wrapped in virtue. The price of saving the unwilling every rescue mission draws from your account. Time, energy, emotional reserves, moral clarity. But when the person you aim to save refuses to change, each deposit becomes a debit. You give, and instead of growth, you receive resistance, sometimes a quiet, seething retaliation. The desire to help is instinctual, entwined with duty. You feel compelled to correct the visible pain. Yet, when this drive is applied to someone unwilling to look inward, it reverses itself. Your energy becomes a tool for their manipulation. Your patience, your guidance are cataloged and exploited. In trying to save them, you may strengthen the patterns you hope to break. The cost is practical, too. Every hour given is an hour not invested in your own growth or in those ready to meet responsibility halfway. Resources spent are sovereign territory lost. You may cling to hope, believing persistence will spark transformation. In that hope, you avoid a harder truth. Not everyone wants to be saved. Some are committed to their storm, using your intervention as a shield against life's natural correctives. There is a moral cost as well. By shielding the unwilling from consequences, you participate in suspending natural justice. You tangle yourself in a compromise where your compassion inadvertently fosters irresponsibility. The world operates on consequence. To interfere without discernment is to risk undermining the principles that make redemption meaningful. The erosion is gradual but relentless. Small signs become gaping breaches. Your patience becomes a battlefield. You confront the reality. The cost of misplaced saving far exceeds the cost of measured distance. Moral and emotional resources are finite. Investing them without discernment diminishes your capacity and may empower the very forces of entropy you hope to calm. This is the bitter paradox. The more you try to save someone refusing change, the more you may cement their patterns of harm. Energy directed without clarity does not vanish. It transforms, often into something far removed from your original hope. Resentment. The inverted gift resentment is a silent, corrosive force. When someone is rescued without accepting responsibility, relief rarely births gratitude. It seeds bitterness, arrogance, defiance. Vulnerability curdles into power. The unaccountable do not stay passive. They internalize the rescue and spin it into leverage, using it to assert control, to dominate, to settle scores with the very structures that offered support. The energy meant for uplift inverts into a weapon. There is a peculiar irony here. The act meant to guide often amplifies the destructive tendencies of the unready. They absorb aid selectively, twisting it into a tool for self-assertion. Resentment builds beneath a surface of compliance until they can redirect their world according to their own will. What was benevolence becomes a mechanism for repaying doubt, even toward their former nurturers. This shift is insidious because it is slow. It begins with minor boundary tests, small debts of gratitude left unpaid. These compound into a network of control and moral inversion. By the time the destruction is obvious, the harm has spread far beyond the initial relationship. The psychology is profound. Resentment thrives where responsibility is absent. When natural consequences are withheld, the mind seeks other ways to exert control, to redefine morality on its own terms. Your help can be perceived as a challenge to their autonomy, a structure to be subverted, a weakness to be exploited. This is why discernment is critical. Compassion without accountability is fertile ground for resentment, and resentment once rooted reshapes everything. The spared individual may seem grateful short-term, but the potential for defiance remains. The energy you invested becomes a debt they can call at any moment, often with devastating effect. The turning of power is almost inevitable. Given resources but no accountability, they often channel that advantage into testing limits and correcting perceived slights. Thus, care transforms into a cycle of destruction, a stark lesson in the latent dangers of empathy untethered from expectation. Responsibility. The non-negotiable foundation. Responsibility is the bedrock, not an abstract ideal, but the tangible forge where integrity and strength are tempered. To rescue someone without demanding their accountability is to undermine growth itself. True transformation cannot be donated. It must be earned through facing consequences, through owning failure, through bearing the weight of one's choices. shield someone from responsibility, and you imprison them in cycles of evasion and entitlement. Responsibility is not punishment. It is the framework for building character, the crucible for resilience and clarity. Without it, compassion risks becoming an instrument of futility or harm. Responsibility instills order in chaos. Consequences exist not to punish, but to educate, to sharpen discernment. Those who avoid them grow weaker, more volatile, more destructive. When aid comes without a requirement for accountability, the recipient may see mercy as leverage, not lesson. The rescue intended to foster growth instead reinforces irresponsibility. Therefore, responsibility is essential. It is the measure of real development. Boundaries are its practical expression. To insist on accountability is not cruelty, it is protection for the individual, the community, and the moral fabric that binds us. A person who refuses their obligations cannot be elevated by sympathy alone. Trying only reinforces destructive patterns, erodes trust, and breeds resentment. Boundaries create the navigational rules of life, making responsibility visible and unavoidable. They ensure compassion does not become complicity. True guidance holds this dual nature, support intertwined with expectation, empathy balanced with discipline. Responsibility is also the source of true empowerment. The one who accepts it gains agency and authority over their life. The one who avoids it remains reactive, subject to the whims of others. In essence, responsibility is freedom disguised as duty. It demands effort, self-examination, and uncomfortable truths, precisely what forges lasting strength. Those unwilling to meet this standard may thrive temporarily on avoidance, but their foundation is sand. The chaos they leave often outweighs any short-term gain from undiscerning mercy. The interplay between compassion and responsibility defines the line between aid and harm. To act without insisting on accountability is to nurture dependence and validate evasion. To act with clarity, making responsibility the cornerstone of your aid, transforms compassion into a true catalyst for growth. Responsibility converts suffering from a purely destructive force into a constructive one. It aligns empathy with the structures of consequence, ensuring guidance is not wasted, care is not exploited, and growth is genuinely possible. Without responsibility, mercy loses its direction. The person spared may feel fleeting relief, but true strength and moral authority can only emerge from bearing the weight of one's own decisions. Compassion without this anchor becomes a danger, a tool that may fortify chaos rather than calm it. The lingering trace every act of misplaced compassion leaves its trace on the fabric of your being. You notice the slow leak of your energy, the fading of your moral clarity, the way your patience is tested beyond reason. What began as virtue reveals itself as a deeper lesson. Intention is not enough. The world does not reward those who exhaust themselves for those unwilling to carry their own burdens. The lesson is harsh but simple. Discernment is indispensable. Compassion must be guided by wisdom, tempered by judgment, and balanced by an unwavering expectation of accountability. Without these, your nobility may be inverted into powerlessness. Those who reject responsibility possess a stark talent for exploiting empathy, turning care into a mechanism for dominance. The hand offered in mercy can become a lever for control. This is the paradox. The deeper your intention, the greater the risk of being misused by the unready. Boundaries are essential. They are not walls of indifference, but structures of protection for all involved. They create the space where responsibility can be recognized and growth can take root. They ensure that the power of moral action fuels creation, not destruction. Understanding this transforms how you move through relationships. You learn to gauge readiness, to conserve your strength for where it will truly matter. You see that some cannot be saved, that some will resist and manipulate despite your best efforts. In acknowledging this, you cultivate a new power. The clarity to act wisely, the courage to withhold when necessary, the wisdom to invest only where true growth is possible. This is not resignation. It is self-mastery, a recognition that responsibility begins with the one who offers guidance, and that preserving moral authority is essential to genuine influence. The consequences of ignoring this play out in the wake of the unaccountable. They move through life with a borrowed invulnerability, wielding the mercy they received as a cudgel. Those who once cared are often caught in the resulting chaos. For the one who has learned balance, these outcomes become insight, not despair. They illustrate that growth cannot be forced, that power must be earned, and that true moral influence is inseparable from responsibility. You come to understand, compassion is most potent when paired with discernment. Mercy gains its meaning when anchored in expectation. Moral authority is maintained not through blind generosity, but through the careful calibration of care and accountability. In this understanding lies the path forward, a framework where influence, integrity, and clarity endure, even in the shadow of those who will not accept the weight of their own lives.